I reject you before the moon, before the pack, and before destiny itself. Lucien Ashford's voice cut through the sacred silence like winter wind sweeping across frozen stone, and for one endless heartbeat, even the ancient wolves carved into the towering pillars seemed to hold their breath. Above the moon temple, the silver full moon hung bright over Blackridge Valley, bathing thousands gathered below in pale light that turned every ceremonial cloak into flowing shadows. Elders stood in solemn circles around the sacred altar while warriors lined the marble steps with unwavering discipline. Families filled every terrace, their whispers fading into complete silence as they waited for the final words of the mating ceremony. At the center of it all stood Aria Holloway, her trembling fingers wrapped around the edge of her ivory cloak as though it were the last piece of certainty left in her world. She had dreamed of this night since childhood. Every story her mother had ever whispered beneath glowing moonlight had promised that the goddess never made mistakes, that every fated mate was chosen with perfect wisdom, and that when two destined souls finally met beneath the full moon, every hardship that came before would suddenly make sense. Aria had believed every word. She believed it when the sacred mark first shimmered across her wrist 3 weeks earlier. She believed it when the royal messenger announced that Alpha Lucien himself had accepted the moon ceremony. And even now, standing beneath thousands of watchful eyes, she still wanted to believe destiny could not possibly lead her here. Lucien looked every bit the ruler the northern packs admired. His midnight black ceremonial coat rested perfectly across broad shoulders, while the silver crest of House Ashford gleamed over his heart. Calm gray eyes revealed nothing, not joy, not hesitation, not regret. Around him stood advisors, commanders, and noble families whose approval had shaped every decision inside the kingdom for generations. Somewhere beyond them, murmurs quietly spread through the crowd. They had expected a royal union that would strengthen the kingdom. Instead, uncertainty settled over the temple like an approaching storm. Elder Miriam slowly lifted the ceremonial staff, carved from ancient moon oak. Alpha Lucien Ashford, she declared, her voice echoing through every corner of the temple. Do you recognize Aria Holloway as the mate chosen by the moon? The silence stretched so long that Aria almost convinced herself she had imagined the fear tightening inside her chest. Then Lucien finally met her eyes. For the smallest fraction of a second, something unreadable flickered across his expression before disappearing beneath practiced composure. No, he answered quietly. His next words carried across every stone wall, every balcony, every listening heart. I reject the bond. A wave of stunned gasps swept across the temple. Aria felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She searched his face for confusion, for doubt, for any sign this was some impossible mistake, but found only the cold certainty of a king making a public decision. Tears threatened to rise, yet somehow she remained standing. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as tradition demanded the final response. I accept your rejection. Somewhere in the distance, a child began crying before being gently carried away. Several elders lowered their heads. Others exchanged troubled glances, as though something invisible had shifted beyond their understanding. Then it happened. The brilliant silver moon overhead slowly dimmed. A crimson glow spread across its surface like ripples crossing still water until the entire sky reflected an impossible shade of deep red. Every torch around the temple flickered at once. A powerful gust circled the altar without touching anyone beyond its sacred boundary. Even the oldest elders stared upward with expressions no one had worn in generations. No scripture spoke of the moon bleeding during a rejection. No prophecy had ever described a sky mourning the breaking of a destined bond. As Aria slowly turned away from the altar, unnoticed by nearly everyone watching the heavens, a faint golden symbol briefly shimmered beneath the sleeve covering her wrist before fading once more. While far beyond the northern mountains, inside a kingdom long believed to have forgotten its rightful bloodline, an ancient crown resting upon a marble throne quietly awakened. The crimson moon lingered above Blackridge Valley long after the ceremony ended, staining the clouds with a color no elder could remember seeing before. Conversations that usually filled the castle courtyards with laughter had dissolved into uneasy whispers. Some called it an omen. Others insisted it was nothing more than an unusual trick of the night sky. Yet every person who had stood inside the moon temple carried home the same unsettling feeling that destiny itself had shifted. Aria Holloway walked alone beneath towering pine trees, her ceremonial cloak growing heavier with every step as cool mountain air settled around her. She did not look back once. The kingdom that had been her home for 23 years faded behind her without a single voice asking her to stay. The silver bracelet her mother had given her as a little girl softly brushed against her wrist with each step, reminding her of words she had never fully understood. When every door closes, do not fear the darkness. Sometimes the stars only become visible after sunset. She repeated those words over and over, trying to keep herself moving. Dawn remained hours away, yet exhaustion had already settled deep inside her bones. The bond she had believed would shape her future was gone, leaving behind an emptiness she could not explain. It was not anger she carried. It was grief for a future that had disappeared before it had even begun. The narrow forest trail eventually opened into rolling hills where the northern kingdom met lands few travelers dared to cross. Legends claimed the kingdoms beyond the mountains had abandoned the old pack traditions centuries ago. Most wolves dismissed those stories as fairy tales invented by wandering merchants. Aria had never expected she would one day stand at that forgotten border with nowhere else to go. A cold breeze swept across the valley. She wrapped her cloak tighter and continued until her strength finally gave way beneath an ancient oak overlooking a winding river. She closed her eyes for only a moment, listening to rushing water below. Then the sound reached her. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, deliberate. Her eyes opened just as elegant white horses emerged through the morning mist, each pulling polished silver carriages unlike anything she had ever seen. Their banners displayed no wolf crest she recognized. Instead, a golden crown rested above a blooming white lily embroidered upon midnight blue silk. The procession came to an immediate halt. A woman dressed in a deep navy traveling cloak stepped gracefully onto the grass. Those silver strands framed her dark hair. Her posture remained regal, and her calm green eyes studied Aria with quiet curiosity rather than judgment. She approached without hesitation and offered a gloved hand. You have traveled far, the woman said gently. Farther than you realize. Aria lowered her gaze. I am only looking for a place where no one knows my name. The woman smiled with surprising warmth. Perhaps that is exactly why destiny led us here. Before Aria could answer, one of the attendants stepped forward carrying a polished wooden chest lined with velvet. As the lid was lifted, an ancient crystal pendant resting inside suddenly began glowing with soft golden light. Every member of the royal escort froze. The glow grew brighter the closer it came to Aria until delicate streams of light wrapped gently around her wrist, revealing the same golden symbol that had briefly appeared beneath the crimson moon. The older woman's composed expression finally cracked with astonishment. She whispered words so quietly that only the morning wind seemed to hear them. After 25 years, the lost heir has finally been found. Aria stared at the glowing symbol on her wrist as though it belonged to someone else. The golden lines shimmered with quiet elegance before slowly fading beneath her skin, leaving behind only warmth that spread through her entire arm. None of the travelers spoke. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on her until the woman in the navy cloak finally stepped closer and bowed her head with unexpected respect. Forgive us, she said softly. We should have found you years ago. Aria blinked in confusion. You must have mistaken me for someone else. The woman smiled with a sadness that suggested she had carried this hope for many years. My name is Eleanor Ravenshield. I serve as High Chancellor of the Kingdom of Valeries. We do not mistake royal blood. Before Aria could ask another question, Eleanor carefully lifted the crystal pendant from the velvet chest. As soon as the pendant rested above Aria's palm, it released another gentle glow that reflected across the river like liquid sunlight. Tiny golden sparks drifted into the morning air before disappearing among the pine branches. Every knight lowered one knee without hesitation. Aria instinctively stepped backward. Please stand up, she whispered. I am not a queen. I am only. The words caught in her throat. She no longer knew how to finish that sentence. She was no longer a future Luna. No longer the mate everyone had expected to celebrate only hours before. Eleanor rose slowly, her expression calm but unwavering. You have spent your life believing someone else's story. It is time you learned your own. The journey began before sunrise. Aria sat inside the royal carriage while endless forests gave way to rolling green valleys unlike anything she had ever seen in the northern kingdom. There were no towering fortress walls built from fear. Instead, peaceful villages rested beside clear rivers where merchants greeted travelers with warm smiles. Children ran through open marketplaces carrying baskets of fresh bread and wildflowers, laughing without concern for rank or status. Aria watched in quiet disbelief as wolves wearing every station of society worked side by side with equal respect. Nobody lowered their eyes when an alpha walked past. Nobody hurried to step aside for an omega. Everything she had accepted as natural suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Late that afternoon, white marble towers finally appeared beyond a shimmering lake. The capital of Valaris rose into the sky with graceful bridges, flowering gardens, and elegant domes that reflected the afternoon sun. Bells echoed across the city as the royal procession entered through towering gates decorated with white lilies instead of wolves prepared for battle. Citizens lined the streets, not because they had been ordered to gather, but because they smiled with genuine curiosity whenever the chancellor returned from a journey. Eleanor noticed Aria's astonishment. "Strength built this kingdom," she said quietly, "but kindness allowed it to endure." The carriage stopped before a magnificent palace overlooking the lake. Its grand staircase curved upward between blooming gardens filled with white roses. Waiting at the top stood an elderly woman dressed in simple ivory robes rather than extravagant jewels. Her silver hair rested neatly over her shoulders, and although age had softened her features, quiet authority surrounded her like sunlight. The moment her blue eyes met Aria's, tears slowly filled them. She descended every step without allowing servants to assist her. When she finally stood before the confused young woman, she gently cupped Aria's face with trembling hands. "Your mother's eyes," she whispered through a fragile smile. "After all these years, you have your mother's eyes." Aria searched the woman's face, her heart racing with questions she could no longer contain. The queen reached beneath her robe and revealed a portrait protected inside a golden frame. It showed a young woman smiling beneath a blooming white lily tree while holding a baby wrapped in an ivory blanket embroidered with the very same golden crest that had appeared upon Aria's wrist. The baby wore the identical silver bracelet Aria had carried since childhood. For a long time, Aria could not speak. She stared at the portrait, tracing every familiar detail with trembling eyes. The woman smiling beneath the flowering tree wore the same silver bracelet, the same gentle expression she had seen only in faded childhood memories. "My mother," Aria whispered. Queen Helena Ravenshield nodded slowly. "Princess Evelyn Ravenshield. My only daughter." The words echoed through the quiet chamber, rearranging every memory Aria had ever trusted. Helena guided her toward a sunlit sitting room overlooking the palace gardens, where thousands of white lilies swayed gently beside crystal fountains. No servants interrupted them. No advisors stood nearby. Only silence remained as the queen opened an old leather journal whose pages had yellowed with time. Inside were sketches of a young princess traveling across neighboring kingdoms, handwritten letters filled with dreams of peace, and finally a single page stained by tears. 24 years ago, Helena began softly. "Your mother believed our two kingdoms could end generations of suspicion through friendship. During one of her journeys, she met a man from the northern territories. They fell in love without revealing their true identities." Aria lowered her eyes toward the bracelet resting against her wrist. "My father." Helena nodded. "Before they could return home together, enemies discovered who she was. Your mother feared that anyone carrying the royal bloodline of Valaris would become a target. She entrusted you to the only woman she believed would protect you without asking questions." Aria closed her eyes. Memories she had not visited in years quietly surfaced. A warm voice singing beside a fireplace. Gentle hands fastening the silver bracelet around her tiny wrist. A promise whispered before sleep. "Never remove it, little star. It will always guide you home." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but for the first time since the moon ceremony, they no longer came from heartbreak. They came from finally understanding why she had always felt different without knowing why. Over the following weeks, the palace became both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. Helena never treated Aria as a symbol or a political prize. Instead, she insisted they share breakfast every morning in the eastern garden where hummingbirds gathered among the flowers. They laughed over childhood stories they had both lost and quietly rebuilt new memories one conversation at a time. Eleanor introduced Aria to the royal council, where wisdom mattered more than inherited rank. Scholars explained diplomacy. Historians revealed forgotten alliances. Experienced governors described how compassion could strengthen a kingdom more effectively than fear ever could. Every afternoon, Aria trained with Captain Nathan Brooks, commander of the Royal Guard. Instead of teaching domination, he taught balance, patience, observation, and restraint. A true ruler, he often reminded her, wins trust before winning arguments. As seasons quietly changed, so did Aria. Her confidence no longer depended on someone else's acceptance. She learned to address crowded council chambers without lowering her eyes. She studied maps until she understood every village, every trade route, every family that depended upon wise leadership. She discovered talents she had never been encouraged to explore because no one in Blackridge had expected an Omega to become anything beyond someone else's future. One autumn evening, while practicing royal protocol inside the Hall of Crowns, Aria paused before a towering mirror framed with white marble. The young woman reflected there looked familiar, yet wonderfully different. Her shoulders stood straighter. Quiet determination replaced uncertainty in her blue eyes. The silver bracelet remained upon her wrist, but beside it now rested the golden crest of Valeries. Eleanor approached without making a sound and smiled at the reflection. "You are beginning to look like the woman your mother hoped you would become." Before Aria could answer, a royal messenger hurried into the hall carrying a sealed invitation decorated with the crest of the Northern Kingdom. The annual summit of the Four Realms had been announced, and for the first time in 7 years, every ruling house had been invited to attend, including the newly restored royal heir of Valeries. 3 years passed before the banners of the Four Realms rose once again above the Valley of Kings. Every autumn, rulers gathered beneath the ancient crystal pavilion to negotiate trade, settle disputes, and celebrate another year of uneasy peace. This year felt different from the moment the first royal procession arrived. Rumors spread faster than the mountain wind. The lost heir of Valeries would attend for the first time. No one knew her face. No one knew her name. They only knew that Queen Helena had officially declared a successor after decades without one. Across the valley, Lucien Ashford stood on the balcony of the northern delegation's residence, watching servants prepare the ceremonial grounds below. At 29, he carried himself with the quiet confidence expected of an alpha king, yet the years had changed him in ways few people noticed. Victory had brought stability to his kingdom, but not peace to his heart. Since the night beneath the crimson moon, strange dreams had followed him without mercy. He often saw a lonely figure walking through endless snow before disappearing into golden light. He always reached for her, but she vanished before he could speak. Every morning he awoke with the same unfamiliar ache that no healer could explain. His royal advisor, Marcus Ellington, approached carrying a stack of diplomatic reports. "The representatives from Valeries have arrived," he announced. Lucien accepted the documents without looking away from the courtyard below. "Queen Helena herself?" Marcus nodded, along with her newly recognized heir. Lucien finally turned. "Do we know anything about her?" "Very little. Valeries has guarded her identity with remarkable care. Some believe she studied abroad. Others claim she lived in seclusion for years." Marcus hesitated before adding, "There is one detail everyone agrees upon. Those who have met her describe her as remarkably wise." Lucien gave a polite nod, though something deep inside him stirred with unexpected curiosity. Meanwhile, the royal carriage from Valeries crossed the final stone bridge leading toward the crystal pavilion. Inside, Aria sat beside Queen Helena wearing an elegant midnight blue gown embroidered with delicate silver lilies. Her long hair rested neatly over one shoulder, and the bracelet she had carried since childhood reflected the afternoon sunlight beside the royal crest now fastened at her sleeve. Eleanor adjusted the clasp of Aria's ceremonial cape before smiling warmly. "You look exactly as your mother did on her first diplomatic journey." Aria inhaled slowly, trying to quiet the nervous excitement inside her. What if they do not accept me? Helena gently placed a hand over hers. Your worth has never depended on acceptance. Walk into that hall knowing exactly who you are. The carriage stopped. Trumpets echoed through the valley as attendants opened the doors. Delegations from every kingdom turned toward the grand staircase together. First came Queen Helena, graceful despite her years. Eleanor followed with the royal council. Then Aria stepped into the sunlight. Conversations ended almost instantly. Hundreds of nobles watched in complete silence as she descended the white marble steps with calm confidence, greeting foreign rulers with quiet dignity. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Years of preparation had erased every trace of the frightened young woman who once left Blackridge Valley alone beneath the stars. At the opposite end of the courtyard, Lucien had been exchanging formal greetings with neighboring kings when the silence drew his attention. He looked toward the staircase almost absent-mindedly. Then time seemed to stop. The woman walking beside Queen Helena lifted her eyes for only a single moment. Their gazes met across the crowded courtyard. Lucien felt the air leave his lungs. He recognized those blue eyes immediately, even though everything else had changed. Before disbelief could become words, the royal herald raised his ceremonial staff and announced in a voice that echoed across the valley. Presenting Her Royal Highness, Crown Princess Aria Ravenshield of the Kingdom of Valeris, first heir to the White Lily throne. The announcement echoed across the crystal pavilion long after the herald lowered his staff. No one spoke. Nobles who had spent years studying every royal bloodline exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to reconcile the elegant crown princess standing beside Queen Helena with the quiet young Omega who had vanished from the northern kingdom 3 years earlier. Lucien remained motionless. The sounds of the summit faded into distant echoes as memory after memory rushed back with startling clarity. He remembered the silver moon, the trembling hope in Aria's eyes, and the words he could never take back. She, however, showed no trace of bitterness. With calm confidence, Aria greeted each ruler according to royal tradition, offering respectful bows and thoughtful conversation that reflected years of careful preparation. She spoke with wisdom beyond her age, asking thoughtful questions about harvests, trade routes, and education rather than displays of military strength. Every answer she gave revealed patience, intelligence, and quiet compassion. By the time the opening ceremony concluded, admiration had already begun replacing curiosity throughout the pavilion. During the afternoon reception, crystal chandeliers reflected warm sunlight across polished marble floors, while musicians filled the grand hall with gentle melodies. Delegates moved from table to table exchanging formal greetings. Lucien watched Aria from across the room more than once before finally gathering the courage to approach. Marcus noticed immediately. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "perhaps it would be wise to wait until tomorrow." Lucien slowly shook his head. Some conversations have already waited far too long. He crossed the hall with measured steps until only a few feet separated them. Aria had been speaking with the Queen of Eastmere when she sensed someone nearby. She turned gracefully, meeting Lucien's familiar gray eyes for the first time since the moon ceremony. Neither of them spoke immediately. Time seemed to pause around them. Finally, Lucien inclined his head with genuine respect. "Your Royal Highness." Aria returned the gesture with equal courtesy. "Your Majesty." There was no anger in her voice. There was no warmth either. Only calm professionalism. The Queen of Eastmere quietly excused herself, sensing the importance of the moment. For several seconds, the bustling reception seemed impossibly distant. Lucien searched for words that had refused to come for 3 long years. "I did not know," he admitted softly. "No," Aria replied with remarkable composure. "You did not." He lowered his gaze briefly before looking back at her. "I owe you an apology." Aria's expression remained kind but unreadable. An apology honors the truth. It does not rewrite it. Those simple words settled gently between them, carrying far more weight than accusation ever could. Before Lucien could respond, a familiar warmth suddenly spread through his wrist. He glanced down in surprise. The faded mark of the broken mate bond shimmered with faint silver light before disappearing again. Aria instinctively touched her own wrist beneath the sleeve of her gown. She had felt it too. Neither of them understood why. Across the room, Queen Helena observed the exchange with quiet concern while Eleanor exchanged a thoughtful glance with Captain Nathan Brooks. Something ancient had awakened beneath the surface of events they believed were long finished. That evening, after the formal banquet concluded, the Royal Council of Velaries gathered inside a private chamber overlooking the moonlit lake. Eleanor carefully unfolded an aged parchment sealed for generations inside the royal archives. The ink had faded with time, but one passage remained perfectly preserved. She read it aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. When the moon rejects its chosen heir beneath a crimson sky, the forgotten crown shall awaken, and the two kingdoms shall stand at the edge of either lasting peace or endless division. Only the hearts that once broke destiny may decide which future survives. Silence filled the chamber as everyone slowly realized the ancient prophecy had never been speaking about the past. It had been waiting for this very summit. Morning sunlight poured through the towering crystal windows of the summit hall, yet the atmosphere felt far heavier than the bright autumn sky outside. The ancient prophecy had spread quietly among the senior rulers overnight, though only a handful understood its true meaning. Most delegates believed it was nothing more than another forgotten legend preserved by royal archivists. Queen Helena knew better. So did Eleanor. Across the chamber, Lucien found himself unable to ignore the strange pull that had returned each time Aria entered the room. It no longer resembled the broken mate bond he had believed destroyed 3 years earlier. Instead, it felt quieter, deeper, almost as though destiny itself had refused to disappear. During the morning council session, representatives debated trade agreements and border policies, while Aria listened with careful attention. When disagreements threatened to delay negotiations, she calmly suggested a shared grain reserve that would protect smaller villages during poor harvest seasons without placing unfair burdens upon wealthier kingdoms. The proposal was simple, practical, and unexpectedly effective. One ruler after another voiced support. Even leaders who had entered the chamber prepared to oppose Velaries nodded with genuine respect. Lucien watched the discussion unfold with growing admiration. This was not the uncertain young woman he had once dismissed before an entire kingdom. She had become someone whose quiet wisdom carried more influence than the loudest voices in the room. After the council concluded, Lucien stepped into the palace gardens hoping for a moment alone. Instead, he found Eleanor standing beside a marble fountain surrounded by blooming white lilies. She greeted him politely before speaking with surprising directness. "You have been searching for answers since the crimson moon." Lucien did not deny it. "I have." Eleanor studied the flowing water before continuing. "Then perhaps you deserve to know one truth that has remained hidden for many years." She explained that Princess Evelyn had never abandoned her homeland willingly. Fear for her infant daughter's safety had forced impossible choices after powerful figures on both sides of the mountains believed the union between the royal bloodlines would threaten the balance of influence among the kingdoms. Aria had been hidden not because she lacked value, but because her existence carried extraordinary importance. Lucien listened in stunned silence. "If I had known," Eleanor gently interrupted him. "Knowledge changes decisions. Character determines them." Those words settled heavily upon his heart. Meanwhile, Queen Helena led Aria into the Hall of Ancestors, where portraits of every ruler of Velaries lined the walls beneath vaulted ceilings painted with stars and silver moons. At the very center rested an unfinished portrait covered by a velvet curtain. Helena slowly drew the fabric aside. The empty throne within the painting waited beside her own. "This was prepared 24 years ago," she said softly. "It remained unfinished because we believed our future had been lost." Aria looked from the empty throne to her grandmother with quiet emotion. "I am still learning." Helena smiled warmly. The greatest rulers never stop learning. As evening approached, every delegation gathered once more upon the great terrace overlooking the valley. Golden sunlight slowly faded beyond the distant mountains while musicians prepared for the traditional ceremony of unity. Just as the first notes echoed across the gardens, an elderly monk carrying the oldest celestial records arrived unexpectedly from the sacred observatory. Without greeting anyone, he lifted his eyes toward the horizon where the full moon would soon rise. His expression changed instantly. In a voice filled with quiet urgency, he addressed every ruler present. "The second sign has begun. before the next full moon. A choice made freely by two hearts will determine whether these kingdoms share one future together or spend another generation divided by the mistakes of yesterday. The monk's warning lingered over the summit long after the ceremony ended. No celebration followed that evening. Instead, every ruler returned to private chambers carrying the weight of possibilities no treaty could easily resolve. Outside, the moon climbed above the mountains once again, no longer crimson but brighter than anyone remembered, its silver light stretching across the peaceful lake below the palace. Aria stood alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens where thousands of white lilies glowed beneath the night sky. The cool breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water, reminding her of another mountain, another moon, and another life she no longer recognized as her own. She did not regret the woman she had become, yet she understood that the past would always remain part of her journey. Soft footsteps approached from behind. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Lucien stopped several feet away, careful not to disturb the silence she seemed to cherish. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence with complete honesty. I have rehearsed this conversation 100 times in my mind, and none of those words seem worthy now. Aria slowly faced him. The years had softened the sharp certainty she once saw in his eyes. What remained was humility, something she had never expected to witness from the Alpha King, who had once stood before an entire kingdom without hesitation. Then perhaps, she answered gently, you should simply speak the truth. Lucien nodded. The truth is that I believed I was protecting my kingdom. My advisors convinced me that accepting an unknown Omega with no family name would divide the northern clans. I chose the crown over the person standing before me. His voice grew quieter. I have regretted that choice every day since. Aria listened without interruption. She had imagined this moment many times during lonely nights in Valeris, but standing here now, she discovered something unexpected. The anger she once carried had quietly disappeared. It had been replaced by understanding, though not by forgetfulness. Your decision changed my life, she said softly. At first I believed it destroyed my future. Instead, it revealed the one I was always meant to find. Lucien lowered his head. I do not ask you to erase the past. You cannot, Aria replied kindly. Neither of us can. Silence settled between them once more, yet this time it felt peaceful rather than painful. At that very moment, bells echoed throughout the palace grounds. Royal messengers hurried across the courtyard carrying urgent correspondence from every delegation. Queen Helena, Eleanor, and the other rulers gathered inside the council chamber where an unexpected proposal had begun taking shape. Inspired by Aria's diplomatic leadership during the summit, several neighboring kingdoms suggested forming a permanent alliance that would replace generations of rivalry with open cooperation. The only obstacle remained the deep mistrust between Valeris and the Northern Kingdom. Queen Helena looked toward Lucien. If this alliance is to succeed, both kingdoms must willingly place peace above pride. Every eye turned toward the Alpha King. Without hesitation, Lucien removed the ceremonial seal of military command from his cloak and placed it upon the council table. The Northern Kingdom withdraws every territorial claim disputed during the last generation, he declared. A stunned silence filled the chamber. Marcus looked at him in disbelief, but Lucien never wavered. No kingdom should inherit conflict simply because previous generations refused to let go. Aria watched quietly as the room absorbed the magnitude of his decision. She realized that true strength had never been found in winning arguments or preserving appearances. It appeared in the willingness to surrender pride for something greater. As the meeting concluded, the elderly monk stepped once more onto the palace balcony and smiled toward the moonlit horizon. The second sign has been fulfilled, he whispered. Now only one choice remains before destiny completes what began beneath the crimson moon. The final evening of the summit arrived beneath a sky so clear that every star seemed close enough to touch. Delegations from the four realms gathered one last time upon the great terrace where white lilies surrounded the ancient circle of accord, a place where rulers had sworn oaths for centuries. This time, no one waited for speeches filled with empty promises. They waited for a decision that would shape generations yet to come. Queen Helena stepped forward first, her silver crown reflecting the moonlight as she raised the ancient charter of unity. One by one, The rulers pledged their support for a future built upon cooperation instead of fear. When the charter reached Lucien, he signed without hesitation before carrying it across the circle himself. Rather than handing it to an attendant, he stopped before Aria and bowed his head with sincere respect. The gesture surprised every witness. Kings rarely bowed before anyone except sovereign equals. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly. "Years ago, I believed strength meant protecting my throne at any cost. You taught me that true strength begins with honoring another person's worth. Thank you for becoming the leader your people deserve, even after I failed to see who you truly were." Aria accepted the charter with steady hands. She looked at the man standing before her and saw neither the proud alpha who had once rejected her nor the stranger shaped by regret alone. She saw someone willing to change, someone who had finally learned that authority meant little without humility. A gentle smile touched her face. "The past cannot be rewritten," she said softly, "but the future is still waiting for every choice we make today." She placed her signature beneath his, completing the alliance between Valeries and the Northern Kingdom. At that very moment, a cool breeze swept across the terrace. The lilies surrounding the ancient circle gently opened as though welcoming the promise that had just been made. Above them, the full moon shone brighter than anyone could remember, washing the valley in peaceful silver light. The elderly monk looked toward the heavens with quiet satisfaction. "The final sign," he whispered. "Not the reunion of two destined mates, but the healing of two divided kingdoms." Warm light briefly shimmered around the faded marks upon Aria's and Lucien's wrists before slowly dissolving into countless golden sparks that drifted upward and disappeared among the stars. The ancient bond did not return. It transformed into something gentler, a reminder that destiny could guide people toward growth without demanding they remain prisoners of yesterday. Months later, the kingdom of Valeries celebrated a historic coronation. Citizens filled every street with flowers, music, and joyful laughter as Aria Ravenshield accepted the crown of white lilies from Queen Helena with quiet grace. She promised to lead with wisdom, compassion, and courage, remembering every lonely step that had carried her toward this moment. Across the mountains, Lucien ruled the Northern Kingdom with renewed purpose. He established new schools, strengthened peaceful trade with neighboring lands, and ensured that no wolf would ever again be judged solely by birth or rank. Whenever ambassadors traveled between the two kingdoms, they crossed open borders instead of guarded frontiers. Seasons passed, and friendship slowly replaced suspicion. On the anniversary of the summit, Lucien and Queen Aria met once more beside the same crystal lake where the alliance had begun. They walked together as trusted allies, sharing stories of their people and hopes for the future. Neither reached for what had been lost because both understood they had already found something greater. As the sun set beyond the mountains, the lake reflected two kingdoms standing side by side instead of face to face. Sometimes destiny does not reward those who never fall. Sometimes it quietly transforms heartbreak into wisdom, rejection into purpose, and two separate journeys into a future where kindness becomes the greatest victory of all.